Picture this. You're sitting at your computer, scrolling through Google Earth, zooming into remote mountains in Pakistan. And you see it. A perfect ridgeline on a peak nobody's climbed. So you do what any climber would do. You get a permit, fly halfway around the world, and climb it. Fast forward to October 2025, and you're standing on stage in Italy receiving mountaineering's highest honor, the Piolet d'Or, the Golden Ice Axe, the Oscar of climbing. This isn't a fantasy. This actually happened to 3 American climbers in 2024. And here's the crazy part. 2 out of 3 Piolet d'Or awards this year went to American teams. In a sport dominated by Europeans for decades, Americans just made history. This is how they did it. Before we dive in, you need to understand what the Piolet d'Or actually is. Established in 1991, it recognizes the most outstanding alpine-style climbs of the year. We're talking first ascents, new routes, no fixed camps, no Sherpas, no oxygen. Teams that climb fast, light, and independently in remote regions. Climbing Everest from the normal route? Impressive, but it's been done thousands of times. Companies will guide you up for $65,000. Opening a completely new route on a mountain nobody's climbed, in a valley closed to foreigners for 15 years, with only photos from Google Earth to guide you, that's Piolet d'Or material. The international jury for 2025 included 7 elite alpinists from the United States, France, South Korea, Germany, Italy, and Spain. They had a particularly difficult task, picking only 3 climbs among dozens of worthy candidates. 2 went to Americans. Dean Steedman, a professional mountain guide from Wyoming, was doing what climbers do in the off-season, dreaming about the next objective. He wanted something in the Karakoram, that's the mountain range in Pakistan that includes K2, Broad Peak, and the Gasherbrums. Something technical, something nobody had done before. So he started scrolling through Google Earth, just looking for aesthetic lines on peaks in less traveled regions. That's when he found Yashkuk Sar, a 6,667-meter peak in Pakistan's Batura Mustaq Range, near the Afghanistan border. The north face was crowned with massive ice seracs, but running up the middle was a stunning north pillar, clean, steep, beautiful. Steedman checked old expedition reports. Only 3 teams had ever attempted peaks in this valley. The last one was in 2006, almost 20 years ago. Why? 2 reasons. First, the Chapursan Valley had been closed to foreign climbers for 15 years. Security concerns meant the region was off limits. Second, even when it was open, teams would take one look at Yashkuk Sar from the north and choose easier objectives. Because from that angle, the mountain is either extremely dangerous or extremely difficult. Not many teams had the skill or the stomach for the steep and rocky north pillar at high altitude. But in 2024, the valley reopened. Steedman applied for a cutting-edge grant from the American Alpine Club, $3,000 to chase a dream he'd found on Google Earth. He got it. His team? Cody Winkler was his primary climbing partner from Wyoming who shared his passion for winter climbing. And August Franzen, a climber from Valdez, Alaska, whom Steedman had never even climbed with before but had been wanting to for years. None of them had ever been to Karakoram. In September 2024, the trio arrived in Pakistan and began the long trek to base camp. The approach took them through the Chapursan Valley, one of the most remote and stunning places on Earth. They set up base camp at 4,000 meters and prepared for what would be weeks of isolation. The weather was terrible. Rain, snow, short windows of clear skies between storms, but they used those windows to acclimatize. They climbed a 5,300-meter sub-peak. Then they tackled Sar, a 6,200-meter peak at the head of the West Yashkuk Sar. Sar had only been climbed once before, back in 1998, from the opposite side. The Americans opened a completely new route up the southeast face. Then on September 19th, they started their push on Yashkuk Sar. They climbed from the Yashkuk Yaz Glacier, aiming for that north pillar they'd scouted on Google Earth. When they saw it in person, they realized they could climb slightly to the left of the buttress crest and still stay safe from the seracs hanging above. The first 2 days were steep snow and ice. They bivouacked at 5,600 meters the first night, then 5,900 meters. On September 20th, they watched in horror as an enormous snow mushroom collapsed right where they'd planned to climb. The entire section was just gone. They thought it was over. But the next morning they found an alternative, a narrow ice arête leading left of the head wall. And that night, September 21st, they set up what Steedman described as the most exposed bivouac of our lives. They were at 6,200 meters, perched on a tiny platform carved into the ice, with the entire north face dropping away below them. On their fourth day, September 22nd, the climbing got serious. Mixed terrain up to M6 difficulty, then the crux, an overhanging ice tube leading through a cornice. When Stedman pulled over the third cornice, trenching through snow deeper than himself, he finally saw sunlight. But with it came brutal wind. That night at 6,500 meters was the hardest yet. They huddled in their shared sleeping bag, trying to stay warm, waiting for dawn. At 7 a.m. on September 23rd, they stepped onto the summit. Nobody had ever stood there before. They'd opened Tiger Lily Buttress, a 2,000-meter route-graded AI-5 plus M6A0, on a peak that had defeated every previous team. But they didn't descend the way they came. They traversed the entire mountain, 10 rappels down the west face, then climbing back over the west ridge, then more rappels down the northwest face. They reached the glacier around 4 p.m. and made it back to advanced base camp by 8 p.m. After 5 days on the mountain, they'd accomplished something extraordinary. The second American Piolet d'Or win is even more remarkable. Spencer Gray, Ryan Griffiths, and Matt Zia traveled to one of the most remote regions of the Himalayas in western Nepal, targeting Kaqur Kangri, a 6,859-meter peak on the Tibetan border. It had only been climbed once, back in 2002, from the Tibet side by a Japanese team. They fixed ropes on the north face and east ridge and made the summit. But from Nepal up the south face, it was untouched. A Japanese reconnaissance expedition in 1998 had looked at the 1,800-meter south face and concluded there was no safe route. Too much serac hazard, too much objective danger. So for 22 years, the mountains sat there, unvisited, untouched, until Gray, Griffiths, and Zia showed up in October 2024. They walked 8 days just to reach base camp at 4,700 meters. 8 days through remote valleys carrying all their gear. When they finally saw the mountain, they had a problem. The only photos they'd found showed just the upper half. The lower section was a complete mystery. They'd have to figure it out as they climbed. First, they acclimatized on a nearby 6,200-meter peak. Then they made their first attempt on Kaqur Kangri's southwest arete, the ridge that looked most solid and most protected from the seracs above. Their stove broke at 5,800 meters. Without water at altitude, they had to retreat. Back at base camp, things got worse. Matt Zia received news that a close friend had died. Shaken, he left the expedition. Gray and Griffiths were now alone, but they weren't ready to give up. On October 15, 2024, the two Americans started their second attempt. Here's a detail that shows how light they were moving. They shared one pair of rock climbing shoes, one pair for two climbers, on a 1,670-meter route with technical rock, ice, and mixed climbing up to M7 difficulty. They climbed in shifts, one in rock shoes leading the hard pitches, the other in boots following, then they'd swap. For days they pushed higher, then they hit the summit headwall, 8 pitches of sustained M7 mixed climbing. And they climbed it during the only 2 days of bad weather in the entire expedition. While a storm raged, Gray and Griffiths worked up the headwall, pitch after pitch, snow plastering their faces. On October 21st, at 6,859 meters, they stood on the summit of Kaqur Kangri, the first ascent of the southwest arete, what the Piolet d'Or jury called one of the hardest routes ever climbed in remote western Nepal. And just like the Yashkuk Sar team they traversed, they descended the previously unclimbed northwest ridge. Another first ascent, 7 days on the mountain. October 15th to 21st, a complete traverse by two climbers sharing rock shoes. Look, if you're thinking, I had no idea Americans were doing climbs like this, you're not alone. These stories don't make headlines. They don't have the drama of Everest or the name recognition of K2, but they represent the purest form of mountaineering, exploration, first ascents, climbers pushing into the unknown. So if you think these stories deserve to be told, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because we're sharing the climbs that show what real alpinism looks like in 2024. Your support means we can keep honoring these climbers. All right, let's talk about the third climb. The third Piolet d'Or went to Tom Livingstone of the UK and Alice Cheeson of Slovenia. Their objective? Gasherbrum 3, a 7,952-meter peak in the Karakoram, one of the most difficult 7,000-meter peaks ever attempted. Until 2024, it had only been climbed twice, first in 1975, then in 2004. For 20 years after that, nobody summited. Teams tried, teams failed. Livingstone and Cheeson had tried once before in 2022. They didn't make it. In 2024, they came back for the West Ridge, a nearly 3,000-meter line that had never been climbed. Between July 31st and August 4th, they pulled it off. After weeks of acclimatization, including a night at 7,000 meters, they left base camp on July 31st. 2 days later, they started up the West Ridge. The climbing was relentless. Steep snow, technical mixed terrain up to M6 at altitudes where most people can barely walk. They bivouacked below 7,500 meters the first night. The second night, around 7,800 meters, they couldn't pitch their tent. So they sat through the night in an open sitting bivouac, no shelter, just shivering waiting for dawn. At that altitude, a sitting bivouac is brutal. You can't lie down, you can't sleep, you just sit there in the cold. But they survived. The next morning, August 5th, they climbed the final head wall and stood on the summit of Gasherbrum 3. Then they descended the original 1975 route on the far side, a complete traverse. They spent the night at Camp 4 at 7,400 meters, then continued down. By August 6th, they were back at base camp. They'd climbed nearly 3,000 meters of new terrain, summited one of the hardest 7,000-meter peaks in the world, and traversed it in pure alpine style. They called their route Edge of Entropy. It's a name that captures the chaos, the uncertainty, and the razor's edge they walked between success and disaster. Here's what's remarkable about the 2025 Piolet d'Or Awards. All 3 climbs were traverses, not just up and down, but complete crossings of the mountains. All 3 were pure alpine style. No fixed camps, no oxygen, just small teams moving fast and light. And 2 of the 3 were Americans who found their objectives through research and Google Earth. For decades, European alpinists dominated the Piolet d'Or, but in 2024, Americans proved they belong in that conversation. They aren't household names, they're not Instagram famous with film crews following them, they're just really good at what they do, and in 2024 they showed the world what American alpinism looks like at its best. These are the stories that matter, because this is what real mountaineering looks like. Not guided climbs up well-trodden routes, just climbers, mountains, and the space between what's been done and what's possible. The Piolet d'Or jury specifically said the Kaqur Kangri climb proves that many difficult unclimbed objectives still exist in the less visited regions of the Himalayas. The opportunity is there, the peaks are waiting. These climbs will be celebrated December 9th through 12th in San Martino di Castrosa, Italy, where they'll receive their golden ice axes. But the real reward, they already got it. They stood on summits where no one had stood before. They opened new routes on mountains that had defeated previous attempts. They experienced the kind of adventure most people only dream about. And they reminded us that exploration is still alive. There are still blank spots on the map, still ridges waiting to be climbed, still summits waiting for first ascents. You just have to be willing to look. Sometimes all it takes is a computer, Google Earth, and the courage to chase a line you found on a screen. The mountains are still out there waiting. If you like stories like these, make sure to watch this video next.